I call the meeting of the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to order. Could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Dossett?
Here.
Mr. Metcalf?
Here.
Ms. Novak?
Here.
Ms. Beluso?
Here.
Mr. Seiler?
Here.
Mr. Shepard?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here. All members are present, so we have a quorum. We have no changes to the agenda. Next item on the agenda then is approval of the minutes from our meeting of November 5th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes?
There was one little typo in section 8 that called Kim the advice chair instead of the vice chair.
I like that.
That's the only thing I noticed that was out of line.
Where was that again?
Right there, they called her advice chair.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the last line in item 8,
Yep.
change advice to vice. Good.
Other than that, if nobody else objects, I'd move that we approve the draft minutes as
Corrected.
corrected. Yes.
Okay.
Second?
Moved by Mr. Shepard, seconded by Mr. Dossett. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved as corrected. Next item is written communications. Jeff? Or Kevin?
Yes, we have received 12 written communications for this meeting, all pertaining to the case HP 2014-L01. 11 of the letters were in support of the nomination, and one letter was in opposition, and that came from the property owner's attorney.
Thank you. Then will you list those in detail during the hearing, or? Yes, okay. Next item is audience participation. I ask those of you who wish to speak again related to the case in the public hearing to hold your commentary for the public hearing if you can. If you have other things that you'd like to speak about at this time, that's appropriate. Does anybody wish to speak about anything else? Thank you. Next item is continued public hearings. I'm going to remove myself as chair and turn it over to the vice chair. I have a conflict of interest because the work initially was prepared by a student in my class at the university.
The public hearing is now open. Case number HP 2014-L01. Request by Robert Nemeth for historic landmark nomination of the Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House located at 1404 South Lincoln Avenue. How the procedure for the public hearing will be: the staff will present a summary of the case. The nominator may outline the request and present evidence, and at that time any opponents can ask questions of the nominator. Other proponents of the request may present to the commission, and again, questions can be asked to those proponents. Then opponents of the request may present relevant evidence, and at this time the nominator will have an opportunity to ask questions of any opponent. Others who may have relevant information to present to the commission may be heard at this time. Additional comments will be allowed by the city staff for clarification or in response to new evidence. The nominator may present a summary of his request at this time. Questions from the commission may be directed at any time to the applicant, staff, or public to clarify evidence presented in the hearing. And after this procedure, the public input portion of the meeting shall be closed, and then there will be discussion by the commission. The commission will review all information presented pertinent to the nomination. If the property owner's consents in writing to landmark designation and the Historic Preservation Commission finds that the property conforms to one or more of the criteria set forth in Section 10(5)(c)(1) of the zoning ordinance, the Historic Preservation Commission may make the final determination to designate the property as a historic landmark. Lacking written owner consent, the Historic Preservation Commission shall recommend to the Urbana City Council whether to approve or deny said application. The City Council will then determine whether to designate the property by enacting the ordinance. Staff, do you want to present a summary of the case, please?
Sure. I'd just like to start out by going through the written communications handed out tonight. The first was a report from the owner's attorney, and it's in opposition to the landmark nomination. And I'll let he's here tonight. I'll let him go through the contents of that. We received a letter from Christopher Enck, a architectural engineer who works on historic building restoration projects in Chicago. He's in favor of the nomination. He mentioned that he's has ties to the organization that manages Alpha Rokai House, which is also a Royer firm designed building. And he says historic fraternities and sororities are a significant part of the architectural fabric of West Urbana neighborhood, and he strongly supports the application. We also received a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Cooney. They're owners of the Smith Russell House in Urbana. They said they support the application, and they found that in terms of potential increased costs for remodeling and renovation, have not been a hurdle for them in their ownership of the landmark house. They've said they've had to only spend up to 10% more to use historic materials instead of modern materials in their renovations. We have a letter from Frank Butterfield of Landmarks Illinois. On behalf of Landmarks Illinois, the statewide nonprofit voice for preservation, he writes in support of landmark designation. As an expert, he says it's a remarkable example of the French eclectic style and a high-integrity example of early campus housing. We received an email from Douglas Armstrong, who's in support of the nomination. An email from Willard Broom, who is in support of the nomination. He notes that Zeta Tau Alpha has served for many years as the southern anchor of Lincoln Avenue's corridor of stately houses. An email in support from Deborah Katz Downey. She supports the nomination. An email from Richard Larimore, who supports the nomination, asks to do all the city can to protect the property. An email from Linda Lorenz, also supports the nomination. There's an email from Esther Patt, who's in support of the nomination, believes that roof replacement and other repairs should still be affordable even if designation is granted. There's an email from Dennis Roberts, who's in support of the nomination, and an email from Alice Vernon, who's also in support of the nomination.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm going to give a summary of the staff memo and a summary of this case, and then we'll let the nominator come up and give more details as they see fit. So this is, HP 2014-L-01 is an application that was submitted on October 13th of this year by Robert Nemeth to designate the Greek House at 1404 South Lincoln Avenue, referred to as the Zeta Tau Alpha House, as a historic, or as a local historic landmark. The property owner is the Zeta Tau Alpha fraternity. Our historic preservation ordinance requires that the commission hold a public hearing on the application within 60 days of receiving a complete application, and that is what we're doing here tonight. At the property owner's request, we continued this case from the November 5th meeting to tonight. Should the application go on to the City Council and be approved, The owner of the house would then be required to obtain certificates of appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission for any future exterior changes to the property, which would include demolition. Pardon me. So for a little background, the ZTA house was designed by the firm Royer, Danley & Smith, which was one of the local firms of architect Joseph Royer. Royer was the most prestigious architect in Urbana between the late 19th and mid-20th centuries. Royer studied under the esteemed architect Nathan Ricker, who I believe was the first person to receive an architecture degree from the U of I. Just a couple of distinguished buildings that Royer designed in Urbana are the Urbana Free Library, Champaign County Courthouse, and the Urbana Landmark Hotel, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. Royer's partner at the time, one of his partners at the time, Hubert Smith, was a notable architect in his own right, and some significant works that he did in Urbana include the Princess Theater remodeling, Leal School in collaboration with Royer, and the Urbana High School additions. All these were completed after his time as a partner with Royer, Danley & Smith. Back in 2013, this property was nominated for local landmark designation, and during that designation process, a newspaper article was uncovered from the Daily Illini from March of 1928 that said that Hubert Smith was the designer of the house. I think there might be some debate as to the accuracy of that article, but I don't think there's any debate that the house was designed by the firm of Royer, Danley & Smith. The house itself was constructed in 1928 in the French eclectic architectural style and was built as the chapter house for the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority. Pardon me. The Greek community at the U of I and in American collegiate life in general has been very important. And the U of I has had the most Greek Letter Society chapters in the country. Back in 1989, 6 of the local fraternity and sorority houses in Champaign-Urbana were listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And while the Zeta Tau Alpha House was not included in the National Register, it was mentioned for possible future inclusion, and the architecturally similar Alpha Rho Chi house was included in that designation. The house has been vacant since 2009, and prior to that time it was rented from ZTA by a fraternity who had really left the house in a state of disrepair, and ZTA did not allow them to continue renting the house. Since that time, though, it's been vacant and it's been vulnerable to vandalism, to weather, and to repeated false fire alarms due to a malfunctioning fire alarm system. In the past year, so since the house was nominated last year, the fire department has responded to 8 additional incidents at the house, which are mostly caused by the malfunctioning fire alarm system. And our building safety division still receives regular complaints from surrounding property owners for broken windows, break-ins, and such. I'd like to make a correction to the staff memo on page 3. It states that in October, ZTA staff informed the city that there was a potential buyer for the property, and then it says that they have not informed staff as to whether the potential buyer is in favor of or opposed to the landmark nomination. I apologize for that mistake. That was from a previous version, a previous draft of the memo. ZTA has actually spoken with me, and they've informed me that there are 2 potential buyers for the house, and they said they're both interested not in tearing down the house, in renovating the house, but both potential buyers are opposed to, or would be opposed to, the landmark designation. In cases of landmark designation, there are 7 criteria according to Article 12-5C of the Urbana zoning ordinance that are taken into account to determine whether a property is landmarked or not. If a property meets one or more of the criteria, it is eligible for landmark designation. The application for this designation states that the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house meets 4 of the 7 criteria, and I will briefly go through the criteria now and explain and give staff's recommendation respecting each. So the first criteria is that the property or the building has significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. According to the application, the ZTA house has significant value with respect to this criteria. The building was designed for a local sorority, and the application says that Greek letter societies have had a profound impact on American collegiate life and were the predominant form of organized student housing around at the time when the house was built. It was built in 1928, and as I mentioned earlier, U of I at that time became the school with the largest concentration of Greek letter societies in the U.S. As I mentioned before, there are 6 local Greek houses that are on the National Register of Historic Places, and while this house is not on that list, we feel as city staff that it would qualify for inclusion on the National Register. City staff therefore recommends that the ZTA sorority house, or agrees that the ZTA sorority house has significant value as part of the architectural, cultural, educational, and social heritage of the community as an outstanding example of the role that Greek life has historically played on the University of Illinois campus, which is recognized as having the largest Greek system of any American university. Criteria 2 was not, the property does not qualify under the second criteria. The third criteria is that the property is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valuable for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials, and which retains a high degree of integrity. The ZTA house features many qualities of the French eclectic style present, or of the French eclectic style, including a steeply pitched hip roof, stucco wall cladding with decorative brick and half timbering, and the presence of a prominent round tower with a high conical roof containing the main entrance to the building. In 2011, the sorority house was included in Urbana's 100 Most Significant Buildings, which was created by the Historic Preservation Commission to honor at least some of Urbana's most architecturally significant buildings. In 1989, when other properties were put on the National Register of Historic Places, the house was noted for potential future listing on the National Register, and the house was also identified in a 1974 architectural survey of Urbana-Champaign as being, quote, exceptionally significant and proposed to receive local landmark status if and when a landmark program for the cities is begun. The second part of this criteria refers to a high degree of integrity. And we feel that the ZTA sorority house has a high degree of integrity with the original building form and the massing remaining. It has its original windows, wrought iron balcony, dormers, and the prominent chimneys. There are a couple of additions on the house. A 1963 addition on the west side which is large, but it does match the original materials and is compatible with the original structure in terms of massing and scale. There was a sunroom built in the 1980s as an outdoor patio, and it does conceal part of the building. That was originally an exterior part. But we feel that the addition is compatible in terms of materials, massing, and scale, and it really doesn't compromise the architectural integrity of the house. Back to the 1963 addition, it is large. It does alter the facade of the building and changes the orientation of the building and how it addresses the street. But it is 50 years old itself. It keeps with the original architectural style, and it really it shows the evolution of the building over the time and does not inhibit the public's ability to perceive the historic character of the overall building, its design, or its setting. Therefore, staff recommends a finding that the ZTA house is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of the French eclectic architectural style and is inherently valuable for the study of that style as well as for its craftsmanship, and that additionally the house retains a high degree of integrity. The next criteria is that the building is a notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. In the application, it states that the house was designed by Urbana's renowned architect Joseph Royer, and that it is representative of Royer's signature architectural style. As I mentioned earlier, at the June 5th, 2013 public hearing, the 1928 Daily Illini article was brought to light, which indicated that Mr. Smith of Royer and Danley designed the house to be of a northern French style of architecture. As I mentioned, Smith was one of the partners of Royer, Danley, and Smith. I think that there is question as to who the main designer of the house was, but really aside from the article in the Daily Illini, there has been no other evidence found to indicate that Hubert Smith was the lead designer of the ZTA house. And what is very clear is that the house is the work of Royer, Danley, and Smith, who by 1928 was experienced in designing Greek houses in Champaign-Urbana, including, as I mentioned, the Alpha Rho Chi Fraternity House at 1108 South First Street in Champaign, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The design of the ZTA house is consistent with the design of the Alpha Rho Chi Fraternity House, which was designed by Royer. And overall, we can attribute the work of this house to the firm of Royer, Danley, and Smith. Staff therefore believes that the property meets this criteria in that the Zeta Tau Alpha house was designed by the firm Royer, Danley, and Smith and is the notable work of master designers and architects whose genius has influenced an area. The next and final criteria that the application submits as this house meeting is that it's identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics. The physical characteristics on the main facade, which I mentioned earlier, are dramatic and unique and are indicative of the French eclectic architectural style, which is representative of the revival styles that Joseph Royer and his firms used in their designs. Given these unique physical characteristics, the ZTA house is certainly identifiable as an established and familiar feature in the community. In terms of a unique location, the ZTA house is located on Lincoln Avenue, which serves as the eastern entrance to the University of Illinois campus. It's also the southern end of a group of other Greek houses on campus as well. So we feel that it can be considered identifiable based on a unique location. So city staff recommends a finding that the ZTA house is identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its uniquely prominent and picturesque roofline rich use of materials and architectural details indicative of the French eclectic architectural style, and visibility from Lincoln Avenue, an arterial roadway which defines the eastern edge of campus. Now, in this case, the Historic Preservation Commission has the following options. You can recommend that the Urbana City Council approve the application to designate the property as a local landmark, or you can deny the application to designate the property as a local landmark. In either case, you should include findings of fact in your motion. And the findings of fact should summarize the Commission's justification for finding that the nomination either does or does not meet the criteria. Thus concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, now it's time for the nominator, Robert Nemeth, to speak. You can make a statement before presenting your evidence, if you want to, on your application, or you can just start presenting evidence.
I have a document that I'd like to make sure gets in the record. Do I give that to you, gentlemen? Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. Do we have a? Yeah, when you are speaking, I'd like for you to say your name and address and also sign in for our records. Yes.
Myself? Okay.
Yes.
I can do that.
Sir, are there any additional copies in case anyone in the audience would like to see what you handed us?
I do have a couple of extra copies. Thank you, Logan. Okay. You can see the document I put together. It's fairly long. I've tried to cut out some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here. Well, my name's Robert Nemeth. Sorry. I grew up in Urbana, not too far from that house. We're in the Carl Park District. I had friends that grew up a half block away from the house. I know it well. My wife and I actually looked at a house right across the street from that. We're thinking about buying it years ago that the U of I Foundation was selling, but unfortunately we didn't. So I know the neighborhood well. It's a beautiful neighborhood.
Can you state your address, please?
Pardon?
Can you state your address now, please?
My address is.
Pardon me. That's actually not a requirement anymore. No, we've actually been asked by council not to ask for people's addresses. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever. I'm flexible. Built in 1928, the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house located at 1404 South Lincoln Avenue is a charming, unique, and remarkably intact example of French eclectic architecture. It is structures such as this that provide appeal and character to not only the immediate neighborhood, but the community as well. Historic preservation preserves the historic, architectural, aesthetic character, uniqueness, and heritage of our community, and helps to provide a sense of place and continuity. The ZT House was nominated as an Urbana landmark on April 8, 2013. The Landmark Illinois, the state's leading voice of historic preservation, the Preservation and Conservation Association, and many citizens strongly supported that nomination last year. The Historic Preservation Commission unanimously recommended that City Council designate the property as a local landmark. The City Council denied landmark designation by a vote of 4 ayes and 3 nays. That is a majority, but since it's over owner objection, it needs to be a supermajority, so it didn't pass. Recognizing and honoring what our ancestors have designed and built demonstrates our respect for these creations and provides an important link to our past. These connections to our past help define who we are, where we came from, and what we value. Historic preservation adds value to our urban environment. It defines some communities and makes them special. We should do no less. Dr. Bruce Hannon, a professor at the University of Illinois, wrote an essay titled A Sense of Place. In that essay, he discusses non-transferable values associated with a place. The ZTA House is a prime example of a non-transferable value associated with a place. The house helps define the neighborhood and is rooted to that spot. The neighborhood would not be the same without it. Ms. Brianna Kraft wrote the original document that was submitted to the City of Urbana Historic Preservation Commission seeking historic preservation landmark status last year. Since I consider her submission to be well written and documented, I resubmitted her document with very minor changes and would like to commend her for a job well done. I'd like to spend a few minutes responding to the 2013 objection to the nomination for historic landmark status. It appears that the objectors do not understand what the historic landmark status affects, and it appears that they are not aware of the benefits that landmark status conveys. Objections regarding the ZTA architectural significance. The objection states that the application does not provide a convincing argument as to why the ZTA sorority house meets any of the criteria for conferring historic landmark status. I disagree. The first objection states that the application failed to present adequate evidence that the house, in its current state, effectively represents the French eclectic style. It is difficult to understand how they came to this conclusion because the building details are such a beautiful example of French eclectic architectural details. The nomination delineates these architectural details well. Additionally, under architectural significance, the objection states that the interior of the house displays an even more significant departure from the original design. That is an irrelevant point. Historic landmark status has no bearing on what transpires inside a structure. It appears that the author of the objection does not understand what landmark designation affects and what it doesn't. Article 12, Section 6 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance, Certificates of Appropriateness and Economic Hardship, Paragraph A states, certificate of appropriateness required, and no person shall make or cause to make any undertaking without the city having first issued a COA approving such work. The key word in paragraph A is undertaking. Article 12, Section 2 under definitions defines undertaking as follows. Undertaking any alteration as defined herein to any building, structure, or attached landscape appurtenances in whole or in part and which in any way affect an exterior architectural feature of the property designated under this article. Changes clearly made to the interior of the structure do not invalidate a building's potential to be landmarked. The Historic Preservation Ordinance only addresses the exterior of the building. So the objection regarding Joseph William Royer, I'm sorry that some of this is redundant to the gentleman from the staff that was talking there. The objection states that in a March 18, 1920 article in a student-run newspaper, the Daily Illini, quotes Mr. Smith, who was a partner in the architectural firm of Royer, Daly & Smith, is claiming to have designed the house. Unfortunately, Mr. Smith is no longer with us to confirm that statement. The book documenting Joseph William Royer's architectural career, written by Dr. Brian Adams, attributes the design to Royer's firm. We will probably never be able to confirm who actually designed the house. However, the most important fact is that the design of the house came from Royer, Danley, and Smith firm. Regarding the issues of Hubert Smith's participation in the design of the building, the record is unclear. The 1928 DI article attributes the design to Smith, but incorrectly refers to the firm as Royer and Danley. Therefore, the accuracy of this count is suspect. Further, the work of the architect is not given, so it's not possible to, the author of the article is not given, so it's not possible to further investigate the quality of the author's work. Records indicate that Smith earned a degree in architecture from U of I in 1932, about 5 years after the Zeta Tau Alpha house was designed. Thus, while Smith may have participated in the project at some level, it's unlikely that an architectural intern would have been allowed to handle such a project without the advice and approval of the city's chief architect. Hubert Smith is not listed in the Handbook of Architects and Builders published by the Illinois Society of Architects in 1928, which does include both senior partners Royer and Paul Danley. The objection also states that the nomination does not make a convincing argument that the house is representative of Royer's signature style. One could argue that Royer's signature style was eclectic. He practiced architecture over a very long period of time and had a diverse range of clientele: commercial, residential, liturgical, and municipal clients. All these clients had different programs, and Mr. Royer responded to these programs with great skill. As an architect, Mr. Royer had to respond to clients' needs, desires, and budgets, which resulted in a diverse and appealing collection of buildings. As to ZTA's historical significance, in 2013, a memorandum from Rebecca Bird, who was on the Urbana City staff at the time, recommended that the commission find that the house has significant value as part of the architectural, cultural, educational, and social heritage of the community due to its outstanding example of a role that the Greek life has historically played on the University of Illinois campus, which is recognized as having the largest Greek system in the American university, of any American university. The objection states that, quote, "It is unclear which characteristics of this particular house and this particular sorority make it such an outstanding example. The argument, as described, could be made about any sorority or fraternity house in Champaign-Urbana." End quote. Beside the fact that ZTA House was a contributing member to the cultural, educational, and social heritage of the Greek system at UIUC, the fact that 18 fraternities, the gentleman from staff mentioned 6. There's actually in Champaign-Urbana, there's 18 fraternities and sororities that are on the National Register of Historic Places. I think it may just be 6 in Urbana. Yeah. Attests to the fact that this is a significant Greek system that values architecture and has many architecturally significant contributing members. The nomination argues that this nomination argues that the ZTA House should be considered one of them. And finally, to further reinforce the fact that ZTA House is a historically significant building, in 2011, the sorority house was included in Urbana's 100 most significant buildings, a list created by the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to honor some of Urbana's most architecturally significant buildings. In July 1989, the sorority house was included in National Register of Historic Places multiple property documentation form for Greek letter societies at the University of Illinois, and is noted for potential future listing in the National Register. And that's significant, being able to be listed on the National Register. The sorority house is also identified in the 1974 Architectural Survey of Urbana-Champaign as being exceptionally significant and is proposed to receive local landmark status if and when a landmark program for the city is begun. So we've been discussing this for close to 40 years now, that this is a significant building. 40 years ago, somebody recognized that this is exceptionally significant, and we're still sitting here talking about landmark status for it. As to the foreseeable cost to the requested designation, this section of the objection rambles on about the undue burden that historic designation would impart on the property without any proof thereof. I will therefore only discuss the most obvious problems with the objection. The objection states that the historic landmark designation would frustrate rehabilitation efforts of the building as follows. Quote, "The restrictions attendant to a historic landmark designation would make it harder and more expensive for ZTA to make the renovations necessary to restore the building to a functional condition." End quote. Historic landmark status can actually provide many benefits to a property. Following is a list of economic incentives from the City of Urbana Community Development Services Planning Division brochure. The City of Urbana building permit fee waiver. Building officials may waive building permit fees to the locally designated historic landmarks and structures in locally designated historic districts. That's significant. That's a definite cost savings. The Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credit is a 20% federal tax credit on certified historic, commercial, and rental structures that are properly rehabbed. And property owners within the district may also be eligible for the state's property tax assessment freeze program. So, additionally, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, IHPA, has a long list of historic preservation financial incentives for programs and organizations that are not affiliated with the IHPA. And then I provide a link to that page, and there are a lot of grants and low-cost opportunities for loans and things of that nature on that list. Furthermore, regarding the economic benefits of historic preservation, I provide 11 reports dating from 1995 to 2003 examining the impact of landmark designation on residential property values. And these reports are from all over the country. The conclusion of every one of these reports is that historic preservation is beneficial to the building owner and community. And quoting from the final report, the claim that historic designation somehow reduces property values is simply a claim with no basis in fact whatsoever. And in responding to the claim made in the objection in 2013, indeed, quote, indeed, maintenance plans have already been delayed due to the instant proceedings appear insincere. Maybe this is incorrect, but what maintenance plans have been developed since landmark designation was denied in 2013? From the exterior, it does not appear that any maintenance has been performed. If maintenance plans are being executed, maybe the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation could kindly mention them. The objection also states that, quote, in order for the house to continue to serve in its capacity as a sorority house, the organization must be able to attract new members. ZTA must be able to adapt the home to make it desirable and functional for students if it is going to compete with other sororities for new members. In fact, as mentioned above, the lack of modern amenities contributed in large part to ZTA members desiring to live in the house. A historic landmark designation will slow the organization's ability to address these needs and desires and will therefore place it at a disadvantage in comparison to other Greek organizations present at the university. As a Greek house, the ZTA house must comply with the requirements of the university's certified housing standards if it wishes to provide housing for students. It is likely that upgrades and modifications will be necessary for the house to comply with these requirements. And the implementation of such changes would likely be delayed and or obstructed by a historic landmark designation, end quote. As I mentioned before, it appears that there is a misunderstanding as to what impact historic landmark status has on a structure. Historic landmark designation will not impede adaptation of the home. Historic landmark designation will not slow the organization's ability to address these needs and desires. It is not the historic landmark designation process that is impeding progress on this property. Nothing has happened to the property since 2009. Therefore, it appears that the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation is to blame for the inactivity. The historic landmark designation will also not place any restrictions on complying with the requirements of the university's certified housing standards, and to claim that the implementation of such changes would likely be delayed and obstructed by a historic landmark designation is also false. A good architect will work with the city and the university to make sure everything is in compliance. The objection also states, quote, finally, if the cost and time requirements of necessary renovations become prohibitive due to a historic landmark designation and the corresponding additional approvals that would be required, the organization could be forced to sell the house. In this case, a historic landmark designation will have contributed to the need to sell and will then necessarily restrict the market of potential buyers for the property, as there will be significant restrictions and additional time and expense involved in making renovations. The market value of the property will accordingly be depressed, end quote. This is all conjecture with no basis in fact. As previously cited, it has been documented that historic status increases property values, not decreases property values. The only reason the property value for this building may be depressed is because the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation has allowed this property to deteriorate by not doing anything to it. Acquiring landmark status may actually make this property more appealing to potential buyers because of the economic benefits afforded historic properties and the distinction of owning a landmark property. So I'd just like to say something about certificate of appropriateness. Based on the 2013 objection, it appears that the attorneys in the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation misunderstand landmark designation and believe that the historic landmark status would impede the remodeling of the interior of the building. This is incorrect. Historic landmark status only applies to the exterior of the structure. I agree that the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation, I agree with them that the interiors need to be brought up to date to appeal to students. The historic landmark designation should not impose any barriers to achieving that goal. For changes to the exterior of the structure, a certificate of appropriateness, COA, needs to be applied for. This should be imposed no impediments to updating the structure. According to the Urbana Planning Department, since 2000, 55 COA applications have been received by the city. Of the 55 COA applications, 29 were approved administratively, which means you fill out some paperwork, go in, they sign off on it, and you're good to go. And 25 were approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, you guys. One case was denied. This attests to the fact that the COA is not a burdensome process. It is not the city's intent to make remodeling of landmark properties difficult. The city is amenable to updates. A good architect should find the COA process simple. So, in conclusion, I and many others desire to see the ZTA House acquire local historic landmark designation. This is to bestow an honor onto this building. We think it is distinctive, beautiful, remarkably intact, and special for many reasons, and considered an important part of the local urban fabric. We think the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation should also consider an honor and embrace the designation. I would contend that the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation should strive to acquire state and national designation as a historic property, since this opens up even more doors for economic benefits and increases stature for the property. In my humble opinion, the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation should be spending their money on architects instead of attorneys. I'm sure that the ZTA Fraternity Housing Corporation would have no problem finding well-qualified architects that specialize in working on historic properties that would love to work on this beautiful building. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Just one real quickly.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Could you please state your name, please?
I'm sorry. My name is Matt Deering. Do I need to sit up here? Sorry.
Oh. Grab a water.
My name is Matt Deering, and I'm here on behalf of Zeta Tau Alpha, the property owner. Mr. Nemeth, I just wanted to clarify one thing real quick.
Sure.
You ran through several potential economic benefits of historic preservation designation.
Yes.
Specifically including tax credit, federal tax credit, and tax assessment freeze program. Is it your contention that those benefits are available to Zeta Tau Alpha in the manner in which the property is used?
Well, that's a good question, and I think Zeta Tau Alpha should ask their attorneys that.
Okay. Would it surprise you if I told you that the tax credit, the federal tax credit, is only available to owner-occupied properties? And then the tax assessment freeze program is only available to income-producing properties, of which this property is neither.
Well, it's a corporation that owns it, so it's not an income-producing property?
It's not.
Okay.
No. Okay, that's the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, at this time, other proponents of the request who may have relevant information to present to the commission may speak. In the interest of time and fairness, let's limit comments to 3 minutes unless you have new information. So would anybody like to speak?
Hello, I'm Richard Cahill. I live in Urbana. I've lived in Urbana 40 years. I am a
member of the Preservation Conservation Association and as on the board of directors. And I like to say that PACA supports this nomination wholly. The only thing I'd like to add a little bit on Mr. Smith. And I'll it's more of a little story. And everybody's familiar with the Ice House. It was a large building on 813 North State Street in Champaign. It was called Smith & Company Fireproof Storage Pure Ice Facility that's been around probably since the early 1900s. It was a very, very prominent building. It took almost between the whole block. And it was owned by, when the ice business went out of business, Dick Ballard bought the building, also the owner of Art Mart. And it was a place where he had a woodworking shop in the back where they used to make the ice. And he was a woodworker, and about every woodworker in Champaign-Urbana at one time stored or did work in that building. In 2010, the city of Champaign bought the building from Mr. Ballard and was beginning to demolish it. At that point, PACA was given permission to look around, and up on one of the top floors, I discovered barrels of blueprints. Now, over the years, the roof was leaking badly, and a lot of stuff was damaged. And so I pulled out a blueprint and unrolled it, and it was from Joseph Royer. And one of the approximately 50 blueprints were found. Some were just tracings. One was for this fraternity house. One was for the armory over by Cana Church that was later demolished. And he was a very good architect. He did an awful lot for McMurray College. I'll pass my little report around, but I have a picture of him, 1940, so we can put a face with the name, dedicating a library built for McMurray College. Of the 50 or so plans I found, about 30 of them were from McMurray College, and about now they're all over there in their library being preserved. The ones from Joseph Royer that I found are now at the U of I archives. I'm just going to keep, Hubert Smith was named as one of the significant architects in the 100 list for the city of Urbana. So he's significant in himself, and he probably was a minor partner at that time, but his work on the Urbana High School is very significant. That 50 edition, he also was the designer of the Wiley School, which is a kind of classic 1950 style building, and it's now what's called the new modern age. So that's all I have to say, and I urge you to pass this nomination one more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents that would like to speak?
Hi, my name's Chris Birdie. I'm a professor of art at Parkland College in Champaign, Illinois, and I'm here to support the ZTA House for historic preservation. As a professor, I've been teaching for over 25 years, and I spend most of my life sharing with students the importance of experiencing things firsthand. And there's a big difference between looking at something in a book and seeing it on the internet and seeing it firsthand. And we have an opportunity to preserve something that people can see firsthand. So it's the people have spoke very eloquently about the historic significance of this building. As an artist, one of the things is you have this thing that acts as a record from a significant period in American architecture, but also buildings like this enhance the beauty and the cultural identity of a community like this. And in the same way that a beautiful sculpture or a garden in a community does too. And there's just no replacement for that if it disappears. We've lost too many over the years, so we have to keep what's left. Lastly, I'd like to say in back of me, I noticed there's some young people there. And I think they would attest to the fact they're learning about, I'm just guessing, but I think that they're probably studying architecture and that sort of thing. And I think that they would be the first to tell you that there's a big difference between experience and living with things of beauty firsthand as opposed to digitally. Thank you.
Chris, did you sign in there?
Oh,
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents that would like to speak? Well, at this time, I'm sorry.
Hi, Dennis Roberts. I live in Urbana. My interest in historic preservation is a significant one. I actually helped to write and create the ordinances that provided for landmark status nominations, and helped to write the ordinance that allowed for individuals to to request landmarking or talk to the property owner when a demolition order was created against a property, allowing for a demolition delay period to work out historic preservation issues with the property owners. So I do have a long interest in the historic preservation process in this community and have been an advocate for it. And I would just like to say that there some of the issues that were presented in the arguments to the City Council that had an effect on the vote of the City Council in 2013 had nothing to do with the actual criteria by which the City Council was supposedly required to make its decision, and which your commission is also required to adjudge the property. So any issue having to do with alleged economic difficulty or inconvenience that may or may not incur to the property owner relating to a historic preservation designation is not actually one of the criteria for selecting and approving a building. It is supposed to be based entirely on the historic quality, the integrity of the building, how it meets the standards of period design and architectural detail, and also the architect significance of the architect. So I wanted also to say that there was a misconception, which I think has been cleared up since that period, that members of the HPC had the impression that they were not able to come to clarify the vote of the HPC to the council members. And we have learned since then that having completed your judicial process in these hearings and having taken a final vote, that you no longer have an obligation to remain silent, but that you, if you feel as an individual that you support the nomination and you want to come to the council and to explain how the nomination was either granted or denied, that you as an individual have a right to do so, because you are no longer in the position of making the judgment. So those were 2 points which came up, which I thought obscured the clarity of the decision, and I just want to comment on them at this point so that we don't have a repeat of that experience in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other proponents? Okay, I'm going to open it up for opponents. Mr. Beery, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I just have a couple of brief comments, really. I've issued my written report to the commission, and the Zeta Tau Alpha Fraternity Housing Corporation, the owner of the property, will stand on those reports. Essentially, we're in a position that we're being asked to prove a negative. We don't think we can do that. So we're simply focusing on the application itself, and we reached the conclusion that the applicant has not provided sufficient evidence to satisfy the criteria as stated therein. Essentially, the application consists primarily of blanket assertions and very little actual relevant evidence. For example, the statements made regarding the significant value as part of the architectural, cultural, educational, and social heritage of the community as an outstanding example of the role Greek life has played on the U of I campus. Zeta Tau Alpha does not understand how this particular house meets that criteria or satisfies that criteria any more than any other fraternity or sorority on the U of I campus, specifically in Urbana. In fact, the blanket statements made about the Zeta House could actually be made about many, if not all, the other fraternity and sorority houses on the U of I campus, not just those listed or mentioned in the discussions regarding the National Register, which it's important to note the Zeta Tau Alpha is not on the National Register. Surely the commission won't find or would not find that every Greek house on the Urbana side of the U of I campus is per se suitable for local landmark designation. The applicant also asserts on another criterion that the house retains a high degree of integrity. Zeta Tau Alpha sorority simply disagrees with that statement. The applicant himself lays out the significant structural additions to the building that quite simply, based on the eye test, both greatly increase the size and general appearance and disrupt the consistency and visibility of the original house. There's been a statement that the largest addition has itself gained significance. As best we can tell, that's essentially based on its age, but there's no true evidence that suggests why that large addition, which essentially engulfs the main original building, is itself significant. The Zeta Tau Alpha Fraternity Housing Corporation simply feels that it's not reasonable to conclude that the house as it stands today retains the original integrity of the house. There's been some discussion about whether this house is a Joseph Royer house. Zeta Tau Alpha believes it is not, believes the evidence shows that it is not. And importantly, referring to the ordinance which governs the actions of this commission and the city of Urbana, the specific language of the criterion references, quote, a master builder, designer, architect, or designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. The plain language of the ordinance clearly does not authorize the substitution of an entire firm for the individual architect identified by the applicant, as suggested by the staff, or as I understood the applicant to suggest this evening. Plus, the evidence presented demonstrates that the assertion that's actually in the application, that it is a Royer house, is simply false. There is no evidence in the record presented by anyone that Joseph Royer designed this house. Finally, the applicant and the staff contend that the location of the house at an intersection of Lincoln Avenue, across from residence halls, and at the entry of a residential area mark the transition away from campus and therefore are identifiable as an established and familiar location or physical characteristic. Reading from the application. My client Zeta Tau Alpha does not dispute the location of the house or what's around it, but it does assert that these same statements can be made about the string of other Greek houses and other buildings along and nearby Lincoln Avenue, as well as other streets around the U of I campus. The evidence simply doesn't support that this is unique to this piece of property. Further, Zeta Tau Alpha points out that the house, as it stands today, sits almost a full lot off of Lincoln Avenue, down Vermont. And since completion of the large addition in 1963, the original house built in 1928 has almost no exposure to Lincoln Avenue. Clearly from the Lincoln Avenue corridor, which the applicant and staff have suggested is important to this criterion, there is nothing especially identifiable about the visible west wall of the ZTA house. In summary, Zeta Tau Alpha urges that the Commission carefully consider the evidence or lack of evidence presented on the various alleged criteria, and after doing so, deny the application to designate the ZTA house as a historic landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, do you have any questions for Mr. Deary?
Well, you know, the additions, you mentioned those, Matt. As an architect, I would argue that they are very sympathetic to the structure, and they are well integrated into the existing architecture, and that they're old enough to be historic themselves, so that, you know, that's kind of an irrelevant point, that simply because it's not a pristine building from back then, that it disqualifies it as being a landmark. Your question before to me about the economic benefits. Now, let me ask you this. Now, if that building is sold, would those economic benefits would possibly be available to some buyer, correct?
Depends how it's used.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and as far as
and that's of course presuming it can be sold.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely, sure. And regarding Royer, to me, the most important fact there is that it's the Royer title block on those drawings, that those drawings came out from the Royer, Danley, and Smith firm. We really don't know who designed it. Royer could have done every last drawing for that thing for all we know. We really don't know. Usually in architectural firms, it's a very collaborative effort, designing a building. So it's very rare that one person will design a building. I think based on everything else that we've seen that Royer has designed, it's the writings on the wall that he was the prime architect on this. So, you know, we can argue this till we're blue in the face. We'll never know. But, you know, that's my contention. So.
I'm not sure I was asked a question, but
Well.
but if I might just make a quick point, that is exactly my point with respect to the writing or the language of the ordinance. You are not allowed by the language of your own ordinance to attribute the design to a firm and find that it meets that criterion. The language of the ordinance does not allow it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other opponents that would like to speak at this time? Thank you. You could step forward.
My name is Andy Brantner, and I'm associated as a neighbor to the property and as counsel for the owner. What is the future goals or plans of the property owner and or structure?
Well, it's been mentioned, I mean,
Yeah,
Sorry.
no. If you have a comment that you would like to make opposing the designation, that would be fine.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No,
That's,
sorry. No.
That's okay.
Ask your questions, though. If you have general questions that you think we need to think about, please comment as such.
At that time. Are there any other opponents that would like to speak? Okay. Are there any others who have an opinion, that don't have an opinion either for or against, but would like to speak at this time?
My name is Nancy Edwards, and I'm a grad student in architecture. And I'd just like to point out, and granted, I have not read the ordinance in fully, so I'm going off by what has been said tonight. But you said that there's no evidence that this is Royer, and it has to be Royer, but there's no evidence that it's not Royer either. I'd just like to point out that difference, too.
Thank you. Yes?
I would simply point out that the burden to prove that negative is not on the property owner. The burden to prove the positive is on the applicant.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to speak? That's neither a opponent or a proponent.
Apologize for my previous. But as a neighboring associate, what's the future plans of the current property owner for the structure and property itself? I'd be addressing the representative of the property owner. I'm sorry if I...
Well, I need a clarification from the staff if this can be done at this time in the public hearing.
Well, in the bylaws, it says, let's see, opponents present evidence, and the nominator shall be able to question the opponent. So it looks like others can give their general concerns, but the opponent does not have to address their questions.
That's the way I understood it. I just
Can
wanted
you
to make
address
sure.
something to us that
Yeah,
you've
you
got
can address us.
concerns that you have?
I'm
that
associated
your
with
questions?
the Greek organization adjacent to the property as a representative of Farmhouse Fraternity Alumni Association. And we've owned and been in that property since 1940 and have always been neighbors to the ZTA organization. And as a representative of the Alumni Association, we just wanted to know what was going on with our neighbors. And what's the future of what's going to be going, the potential, since we've been there for, almost over 70 years, 75 years. So that's all. That was my question.
Well, I appreciate your concern, and if
I understand.
they would like to address it, that.
Could you sign your name on that sheet, too,
Yeah,
please?
here's my phone number.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any additional comments that would like to be made at this time? Okay, are there any additional comments by the staff or clarification? New evidence?
Couple things. We forgot to show the photos during our report, so we'd just like to go back and show those so the audience can see. And there were questions about the economic incentives for designation. It's true the property tax freeze incentive only applies to owner-occupied structures, but the building permit fee waivers are available to any landmark, and the 20% rehab incentive tax credit, it's only available for income generating properties. So if this property were to, in the future, be a rental house, that would be considered income generating.
Shall I narrate? Okay. So these pictures are actually just from the application. So this top picture just shows the view from Vermont, and in this, you see on the right side, that's the original 1928 house, and then on the left you see the 1963 addition. So where it sort of juts out there, that left, maybe I can, yeah. So that's the 1963 addition. And then the original house, 1928 house is over here. This is looking from Vermont Street. These are a little bit smaller. Maybe I can zoom in without compromising too much integrity. This one's hard to see if you're in the audience, but this is the southeast corner of the house. The addition in the 1980s of the sunroom is this area right here. Oops. And then we have a view from the east where you see the chimney and some of the detail. A view down here from the north, and then from the west, looking from Lincoln Avenue. The legal counsel for the property owner is correct. When you're looking from Lincoln Avenue, you basically just see the 1963 addition. This view in the upper left is showing the original house and that entrance. So that, yeah, just the entrance area and all that. A little bit more of the detail you can see on these. And a couple more pictures, pretty similar views, but from 1990, it looks pretty much the same, except the windows weren't boarded up back then. It was still being used by Zeta Tau Alpha back in 1990. Here we have a black and white photo of the when the addition was being built in 1962. The addition completed up here, upper left, in 1963, and then again the same, pretty much the same view in 2013. And a 1931 picture of the old sorority, and the old sorority house before they moved into this one. These images show the original, looks like, I'm guessing that's a drawing from I don't know. That might be a photo from 1928 showing the original house without that 63 addition. The title block indicating that it was designed by the firm of Royer, Danley & Smith in 1928. And here are some drawings and blueprints and such. Which, if you're in the audience, I apologize. You really can't see those. They're hard to see even on the screen. So, more blueprints and, yeah.
Go up a little bit. One more page. That big one there.
This one?
The south facade.
Yeah, so that's looking north from Vermont.
Did they chop off part of it to put that addition on there, or just build over it? Is that what happened?
That looks like the picture is stretched.
Is that
to me.
one above it? It seems like the house is a lot smaller. That one.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
It seems to me like that drawing is just out of scale. Look at how wide.
Okay. And maybe
Look at how wide this main part
turned
looks.
somehow or something. Okay.
Somebody projected it wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
Comments?
No, I don't believe so. Jeff?
I guess I would just add that for the landmark criteria, a proposed landmark must meet one or more of the criteria discussed. So if the commission finds that that it was not a notable work of a master builder, designer, or architect, there's the other criteria that they could use to nominate.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Nemeth, do you have would you like to have a summary for your request, your nomination? Would you like to say anything additional? Yes.
It's just such a beautiful little property, and it's just so important to the urban fabric to save that the additions are well done, exceptionally well done. That I think it would be a shame not to landmark this property, that if it does get sold, it'll probably, my guess is, and this is just conjecture, that it would be used as a income-producing property, so they would receive benefits that would be available to them, economic benefits. I think it would be a shame not to landmark this building just because of its just beauty, you know, and its integrity, too.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant, staff, or public before we close the public input portion of the meeting?
I have a question for the owner. I'm just wondering if, since Zeta Tau Alpha, or the original name of the sorority, actually had this building designed and built, if you guys know who designed it, if you have the documentation that says who the actual designer was.
We have looked and don't have anything other than the blueprint stamped by the firm.
Okay, so we all have the same documentation that says that okay, so there's nothing else that documents who it might have been. Okay.
That we're aware of.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask because, you guys, or the sorority is the person that asked for this to be designed, so I just was wondering if there was any documentation.
That was in 1928.
Right, I know.
Any additional questions?
I have a few. I was just curious in regards to Mr. Deering, the ZTA Corp itself. Are you a for-profit corporation?
It is not a for-profit corporation. I believe that's correct. I'd be happy to confirm for you.
Okay. All right. If that could make its way into the record, that would be great. And then, do you happen to know if ZTA Corporation owns any other historically significant properties or designated properties? I mean, I presume it's a nationwide sorority. So
it is. I believe we've had discussions where they own one other, and that's part of the reason they're objecting today.
Oh, because of the experience that they had in the other situation. Okay. And then, lastly, do you know what the group plans to do in the future? Is there any chance? Well, you can tell me what the likelihood is that it may return to being a sorority house.
Well, we stated in the proceedings last year that was certainly the desire, but that circumstances were not allowing it, weren't right. Sorority participation going down rather than up, the idea of competing for a smaller group is just not feasible. In discussions with my client over this proceeding, I've been told that nothing has changed in that regard.
Okay, so at this point, it's not appropriate to say that ZTA is prepared to.
There's no action towards that.
Okay, one way or another.
One way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I now close the public input for the public hearing. Now it's time for the commission to discuss. Do any commissioners have comments?
I guess I have a few. And I found it really interesting that the owners don't find that the building is significant when in their own Exhibit B, which is an old newspaper article or magazine article, about the property being built, it talks about how this is such a palatial home, how the location is just a fortunate setting for such an imposing house. So it just, and then there's, at the end of it, it says that the building committee was composed of respected members of the sorority. So obviously, this was like the crown jewel of the sorority. And for the corporation that owns this house to now come back all these years later and say, well, we've given you this information, but disregard it. I can't understand how the owners can say it's not significant when they've supported the significance in their own documentation. I hope that someday that will be an income-producing property so that 20% tax credit can be used. Based on the National Park Service, over 1,000 projects a year are approved for $4 billion annually that goes back into communities. Owner-occupieds don't qualify, which Jeff pointed out, but any income-producing property certainly does qualify for that 20% tax credit. And I think that the nominator tonight, with all the links that was in his secondary documentation, documented well above and beyond how historic preservation is economically viable.
I'd like to comment as well on the structure. There was some discussion about whether or not the structure continued. The addition, as you look at the main facade, I think, was it the 63 edition, the larger one? Though it is a little bit larger proportionally, I would argue that just sheerly looking at it, you can see in the gable, they've matched the design. You can see on the exhibit of the west facade, the small, on page 13 of the city prepared document, on the bottom right, they've paralleled in this Oriel window. You can see that they've clearly paralleled the original house. You can look at the trim around the windows. Those windows continue to match, though they are a little bit different. They do look similar to that. You can see the stonework that continues to rise along the side, the stone coining. I think there is enough, to my mind, there is enough evidence that the addition also is significant and does not detract from works in harmony with the original construction.
Any other comments?
Going through the criteria, the four that I believe this house falls under, it is an example of the Part A, that it's an outstanding example of rural Greek life on campus, and especially it's the first one you see basically when you kind of go by the residential area there between Vermont and Florida, and then boom, there's this great big interesting fraternity house, sorority house, if you can't tell by looking at it, but a sorority house. And
can I add to that a second, Trent?
Sure.
Too, on Exhibit B that the opposition submitted. There's a sentence in there that says the location is the new district for women's fraternities in the university. So it's clearly a part of what was at that time a movement to create this particular area.
Well, all the way down to Nevada, so almost, I guess, or Iowa anyway,
Yeah.
Nevada. There's just that whole string of sorority houses all along there, and they're some are National Register and pretty imposing houses, and this is one of them. An earlier one, maybe earlier than a couple of them, but probably wasn't a whole lot in advance of them. Under C, just the distinguishing characteristics of this French architectural style and its craftsmanship, which is amazing, I think, the craftsmanship and the high degree of integrity, especially on the old part. It's still there. Under D, the notable work of a master designer or architect. I'm not convinced that it's not a Royer house, and I'm not convinced that even if Mr. Smith happened to do more work and had his name on it in that article, that he isn't a person of note anyway. But to me, it's a Royer house, and when you compare it to the Alpha Rokai house that he designed, that's very similar to it. It's either a copy of his done under his supervision, or he designed it. It just seems like a Royer house, and I'm not convinced that one student article saying somebody else is the designer, even if that person wasn't even an architect yet, I'm not convinced by that. And as I mentioned about the visibility of the house from Lincoln Avenue, and going north on Lincoln, you see the Vermont side of it. It's identifiable, and it's part of that whole string of sorority houses, and it's the first one you see from that direction. So all four of those criteria, A, C, D, and E, are easy for me to understand why it's recommended that we landmark it under those, and they're relatively obvious to me that this house does fall under those and is worthy of being landmarked. So if we have a motion, I think I'm prepared to vote for it.
Any other comments?
Thanks for everyone for their time and contribution to this. After the exception that was noted for criteria D, I went ahead and looked at the ordinance, and although I hesitate to get into a syntactical argument with a trained lawyer, I want to read, just for clarity, what that says, and Trent almost read the whole thing. D says, this is the ordinance language, notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. So the ordinance doesn't talk about an individual or singular builder, designer, or architect. It talks about the notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. So to me, I was, frankly, a little shocked at the way D was portrayed, and so I wanted to make sure that I felt like I was on firm footing with, the issue that we're approaching here. As I read that criteria, it's inconsequential whether Royer himself or a firm that Royer played a major part in was the designer of the home. It's more his individual genius that's influenced the area that we're responsible for considering here. So over and above that, I pretty much agree with everything that everyone else has said about the presentation that's made. And I guess the only comment that I would make, and maybe this is not an appropriate comment, time to comment about processes, it would have been nice to get the objection sooner so that I could have read it, because I've had to try to digest it now to pay deference to the opinions of the owners, and I think I've over the course of the long discussion had a pretty good opportunity to do that, and I don't think it will inhibit me from making a fair and considered vote tonight. but it's really hard to pay attention to everyone else as I'm trying to sort of catch up on the piece of paper. So that's, note to staff or whatever, so thank you.
Anyone?
I'd like to say one other thing too. I agree with you, Scott. It would be nice to have gotten it a little bit earlier. So as we go forward, that would certainly be helpful. One other thing that was brought up tonight was the discussion of the house as representative of the cultural experience of what it's like to be in a sorority or fraternity house. And though I was not in a fraternity house, I have family members who were, and as a student at the U of I can say that the sorority and fraternity experience is a significant and impactful part of the experience of going to the U of I for a great number of students, and it has been for such a long time. And as we heard in the staff report, we were or are the number one. We have the most number of Greek houses in the country, and so that falls on us, I feel, to a certain degree, to recognize that and to acknowledge not only the contributions that these groups make to all of us in the city, but particularly to the lives of students on campus. And if designating this helps to recognize the role and the influence that fraternities and sororities have had in our town, then I would applaud moving this forward.
I'd like to say that I agree with the staff analysis findings and recommendations. I think that it's an excellent example of the French eclectic style. It's got the asymmetrical facade. The original building had the asymmetrical facade. It had the Norman tower with the high conical roof, the tall, steeply pitched hip roofs. I know one of the hips got gobbled up by the 1963 edition, but I think they did a pretty sympathetic edition in 1963. The big massive brick chimneys, the stucco wall cladding and half timbering, the decorative brick, which that skintled brick was a technique that originated in Chicago, which I found interesting. The brick coins at the corners and the multi-pane casement window panes grouped in pairs. I think there was a quote, and I mentioned this last year when we did this procedure, that they called them picturesque details, and it really is. It's a beautiful building. Any other comments?
I have a motion to put forward if you want to start working on one.
That would be great.
Okay, so in the matter of 404 South Lincoln Avenue, Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House, the historic landmark application, case number HP 2014-L-01, as granted in section 12-5.c of the Urbana Housing Zoning Ordinance, the Historic Preservation Commission finds that the landmark nomination for this building conforms with criteria A, C, D, and E, and recommend approval of the application. Specifically that for criteria A, the ZTA house has significant values in the cultural and civic history of the U of I campus area as a unique Greek letter house in an especially visible area. For criteria C, the property is an inherently valuable architectural style, being a superior local example of the French eclectic with high integrity. For criteria D, the house is a notable work of local architect Joseph Royer. And finally, for criteria E, the ZTA house is identifiable as an established and familiar visible feature of the southeast campus area. End.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do we have any discussion on the motion?
I wonder if we ought to add in part of the findings, just those kind of formalities there that you did mention title Article 12 of the zoning ordinance. that we received the landmark application on October 13th, opened the public hearing on November 5th, and continued it to tonight.
That's not in it. Should we add that?
I don't think it's...
Does it have to be there?
I don't think it hurts.
I mean, I thought the case number probably was the big reference that we needed in order to trace all that detail, but... Okay. Application submitted when?
Received October 13th. We opened the public hearing on November 5th and continued it. It may not be necessary, but I don't think it hurts to mention these findings anyway.
Okay.
Do you have, are you writing something?
I'm trying.
So that you can give to
Yeah,
staff?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the most important thing to me, when I think about these motions, are establishing the rationale for the criteria.
Right, which you've done.
And,
Yeah.
I was working on trying to, make that as lucid as I could. So, maybe I could read those over again, and if anybody has any additions or subtractions they think we should make, to me that's kind of the nuts and bolts of this. So specifically that for criteria A, the ZTA house has significant values to the cultural and civic history of the U of I campus area as a unique Greek letter house in an especially visible area. For criteria C, the property is an inherently valuable architectural style, being a superior local example of the French eclectic with high integrity. Criteria D, the house is a notable work of local architect Joseph Royer. And finally, for criteria E, the ZTA house is identifiable as an established and familiar visible feature of the Southeast Campus area. I mean, I didn't integrate, for example, Matt's comments about the Greek culture or things that people mentioned about women on campus or, that kind of stuff. But, I mean, the motion's already probably 150 words long, so.
Are you ready to vote on the motion? Roll call.
Mr. Dossett?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf?
Yes.
Ms. Peluso?
Yes.
Mr. Seiler?
Yes.
Mr. Shepard?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes. 6 yeses and 1 abstention. Okay. I believe this will go before the City Council at their December 15th meeting. And I'm going to close the public hearing now, and I will relinquish the chair back to Alice. Thank you, everyone.
We have no old business, no new public hearings, no new business. Is there anything under monitoring of historic properties?
Nothing from staff.
Okay, anybody else?
I did just want to mention that I drove by Royer's house tonight on Oregon. We had spoken last time that the house had sold, and it actually looks like they're taking some, on the outside anyway, the landscaping looks like it's been cut back, the hedges are cut down, and you can actually see that porch now that's on the east side of the property. So I just wanted to mention, I just happened to drive by tonight, and it's looking pretty good.
Okay, great. Kevin? Oh, did you have? No. Oh, staff report.
Thank you. I just wanted to let the commission know that we applied for a certified local government grant through the Illinois Historic Preservation Association to develop some interactive online maps of historic properties, districts, etc. So, not sure when we will hear back on those or on that grant application, but stay tuned.
There were 21 CLGs that applied for grants.
Is that right?
Yeah, afraid so.
Okay, so what, we should hear back tomorrow or something?
Yeah, any minute now. We have no study session. Do we have any announcements?
Not from staff.
Okay. Nothing? Okay. In that case, motion to adjourn? Yes?
I move that we adjourn unless somebody
No,
else
Kim moved.
Kim moved. I would second that then.
Okay, good. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.